All right, Hope City, good morning. How are you? Good. You're like, who are you? If you don't know me, my name is Ben Foote. I'm just a friend of Cody, a friend of Hope City. I've been out here a couple times. I'm always honored to get to be here. Thanks for having me. I'll be out chilling by the coffee after this. I'd love to meet you afterwards, so don't be a stranger. Come say hey. But we're gonna jump right in today. Today, I wanna start by telling you a story from my own personal life, okay? So I went to college in East Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains, a little town called Johnson City, Tennessee. And I loved living in this area, okay? This was before I had kids, of course, so I had time. I had time to go hiking and climbing and trail running. I was outside in the mountains every single day. I absolutely loved it. But one of the things I loved doing the most was going caving, okay? I loved exploring caves. And the caves in this part of Tennessee are exactly what you're picturing in your mind. They're these big cavernous rooms with stalactites and stalagmites and underground lakes. And the entrances are just these gaping holes with bats and ghosts and Yogi the Bear and people making drugs out of household cleaning products. It's everything that you're picturing. And I loved going caving. And so there was this one cave called Saltpeter Cave that was supposed to be right behind our campus within walking distance, but me and my friends could never find it. One of the reasons we could never find it is we could only look for this thing at night because the cave was on the property of an old man, and there were these legendary stories on campus about how this guy would chase off potential cavers by firing a shotgun over their heads and screaming at them. So it didn't stop us from looking for the cave, we just couldn't never find it. Until one day, in the campus library, I see this book called Caves of Tennessee. It's got hundreds of caves in it with descriptions and maps of the interiors, and most importantly, GPS coordinates for how to get to these caves. Sure enough, Saltpeter Cave is in this book. So I check the book out from the library. I run back to the dorm. I'm super pumped. I rally all of my friends, and I'm like, guys, tonight is the night we're actually gonna find Saltpeter Cave. By the time the sun sets, all of my friends chickened out, except for me and my buddy Troy. All right, so Troy and I are like, fine, whatever, you guys are pansies. We're just gonna go without you, just the two of us, into the woods at night alone, which is how every horror movie, begins. And so we're traipsing around in the woods, and we're by the coordinates where it says the cave is supposed to be. I still don't see a cave. I don't even see anything that looks like it could be the entrance to a cave. But we're still kind of wandering around for maybe 15 minutes. After some time, the clouds kind of roll away from the moon and we can see a little bit better. And we realize that we're 20 to 30 yards maybe from this ramshackle little cabin. You can just see the silhouette of it in the moonlight. There's no lights on inside. And this is when we realize I'm pretty sure we're in this old man's backyard right now. That's when things get a little bit terrifying because Troy's off to my right looking for the cave. I'm over here, and then off to my left, I start to hear footsteps in the leaves, right? Just like that. But I'm trying to calm myself down. If you've done a lot of hiking and camping, things in the woods sound bigger than they actually are at night. And so I'm like, it's probably just a squirrel or something. I'm gonna be fine. But I do start making my way over towards Troy. And what's weird is that anytime I walk, I hear the footsteps. And then anytime I stop, they stop. Like something's stalking me. And so I get close to Troy. I smack him. He nods as in yeah, I hear it too. And we just go completely still, completely silent, just listening. After a few minutes, the footsteps start up, even though we're not moving. Just they get closer and louder and faster. And both Troy and I are just run! So we turn around, we're running out the woods. This thing is chasing us. At this point, I'm like, it's definitely not a squirrel. This is something on two legs following us. It's chasing us through the woods. It chases us until we break out of the tree line and into this meadow that's within view of the campus parking lot and street lamps and all that stuff. Stops chasing us. We don't stop running. I run all the way back to campus, all the way back to the dorm, up the 4th floor. We don't stop running until we're back in my room with the door locked, right? So now we're in this room. And I'm just panting and we're trying to recover. It's the most I've ever run in my entire life. And so we're like recovering, and I grabbed this Caves of Tennessee book because I'm furious. I'm like, this thing misled us. Like, I'm pretty sure this thing almost got us killed. And so I grabbed this book and I flipped to the entry on Saltpeter Cave, and I start to feel really stupid. Because earlier in the evening, I never read the entry. I just saw GPS coordinates and put them in my old school GPS device. Now I'm actually reading the thing for the first time, and I discover there's actually 2 sets of coordinates in the entry for Saltpeter Cave. The second set of coordinates takes you to the cave, which was like half a mile from where we were just wandering around. The first set of coordinates that I put into my GPS take you directly to the old man's house to ask permission to be on his property. I straight up had the wrong set of directions. Now, side note, against all forms of wisdom and sound judgment, we went to the cave like 30 minutes later. We did not get shot or screamed at. It was an awesome cave. But the moral of the story is this: our desire, what I wanted, was a good thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting to go explore a cave. It was the right thing. I was even in possession of the guide to get me there, but I didn't read the thing. And so the result was that I was looking for the right thing in the wrong place. Still to this day, I think it almost got me murdered in the woods. And I tell that story because I have a hunch. And my hunch is that I think that most of the pain that we create for ourselves, like most of the baggage that we heap on our own shoulders, in other words, most of the sin that we experience on a day-to-day basis, I think it's usually, not always, but usually the result of looking for the right things, but we're looking in the wrong places. Like when you dig down deep, I think that's what's going on. Like for example, maybe you're just looking to be desired, and that's a good thing. You were designed to be desired. It's just that you're looking in the wrong place. You're looking for that in toxic relationships, or the amount of likes that you can get on social media, or maybe you're looking for community, but you're building it through gossip and trash talk, or you're looking to feel like you're enough by working yourself into the grave, or you're looking to heal from your past by numbing yourself through addiction. It's like 9 times out of 10, when we sin, we're really looking for the right things. We're just looking in the wrong places. I'm not trying to minimize our sin and say that's okay. It's still wrong. We still need forgiven for that. Thankfully, we are. All I'm trying to say is that none of us set out to make a mess of our lives. Right? You didn't wake up one morning and go I think I'll blow my marriage up today. That's not how it worked, right? Instead, we wind up with a mess on our hands because we were looking for the right things in the wrong place. And so what do we do about that? Right? And in a world and in a culture that's filled to the brim with thousands of competing ideas for how to live your life and what's important and where you can find happiness, in a world like that, how do you and I start looking for the right things in the right place for a change of pace? That's what I want to talk about today. All right, to do that, to figure that out together, we're going to turn to the Bible. And because your summer series is all about the Psalms, we're going to turn to Psalm 19. Psalm 19. This psalm is attributed to King David. And it's one of those psalms, it's got 3 distinct and unique sections. And so what we're going to do together today is read through those. We're going to read through the whole first section and then break it down. Read through the whole second section, break it down. We'll do that. And by the end, you and I will have a pretty good idea of what David was getting at when he wrote Psalm 19. So we're just going to jump in, get started. We're going to read the first section of Psalm 19 together. And the first section is all about creation. Okay? David says this. It says, the heavens, that means not heaven, but the skies, declare the glory of God. And the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And day after day they pour forth speech, and night after night they display knowledge. And there's no speech or language where their voice is not heard. The voice of the skies goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. And in the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. The sun rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other, and nothing is hidden from its heat. It's the first section of Psalm 19. And in the first section, David he's just nerding out about creation. That's what he's doing. Like, I like to imagine that he's out on a morning walk, and it's the same walk he takes every morning, but for whatever reason, this morning, he's just blown away by how beautiful the world is. Right? I'm not sure if you've had that experience. I hope you have, but I have this all the time. And that's because I live in a place that's easy to take for granted, right? I live in Denver, Colorado. Like the front range of the Rocky Mountains is always looming over me. All I have to do is look west, right? But because I live there, I take it for granted all the time. Just kind of is just the background while I'm racing around town trying to get my kids to school and volleyball and baseball, and I'm just locked up in my office writing sermons so that I can jump on a plane and fly to Joplin and hang with you guys. It's like my life is just as busy as your life is, and so I take where I live for granted. But then every now and then, like, I'll just get floored by Colorado. And this happened the other day. I was driving home with my whole family in the car. It was evening, and so the sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains. This is a time of day where the mountains always look their most intimidating and their most powerful. So that's happening. And then we're also driving towards a thunderstorm, and it was a big one. Like, there's these big, like huge, low-lying dark clouds, and you could hear the thunder rolling in the distance. And it was one of those storms where the lightning in the clouds was like literally nonstop, like a strobe light, you know? It was like a rave party in the sky, you know? And this is all flooding my senses, and I just had a moment like David is having in Psalm 19. Just this moment where I'm like struck by how powerful and beautiful the world is. It was enough to take my breath away. It's like for me and my family that night, the stormy sky was declaring the glory of God. And that's what David is talking about in Psalm 19. He's just floored by how beautiful creation is. Even the way he talks about it, I'm like, you could fit right in with the people I know in Boulder, Colorado, right? Like, especially when he talks about the sun, he's basically just going like, the sun is crazy, man. Like, goes like this every day. He sounds a little bit like, never mind. He's just nerding out about creation. Right? He's nerding out. Specifically, though, he's not just nerding out. He's saying that creation testifies, which means speaks about its creator. That's the language that he uses. He says the skies declare the glory of God, and they proclaim and pour forth speech and display knowledge about God. In fact, the first section of Psalm 19 that we read together always reminds me of Paul, what he wrote in Romans chapter 1. He said something very similar. He said, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, they've just been clearly seen. You can understand it from just what's been made, so that men are without excuse." Paul's basically saying, like, there's no excuse for believing that there's no God. All you have to do is look around. Like, the world we live in, with all of its beauty and all of its power, is declaring that there's a God. Creation is demanding that there's a creator. And in the first section of Psalm 19, that's what David is getting at. All right, one more thing before we move on to the second section of Psalm 19. It's something I think is super interesting, but we have to be word nerds for a minute. In the first verse, when David says that the heavens declare the glory of God, the word for God he uses is the Hebrew word El, E-L-L. And El is just like the universal general word for a God, any God. Doesn't necessarily mean the God of the Bible. Like in the Bible, when it talks about pagan gods, it's talking about pagan Els. And I bring that up because remember, we started this thing talking about looking for the right things in the wrong place, and how do we start looking for the right things in the right place? Well, in the first section of Psalm 19, David is basically saying, if you're looking for a God, then just look no further than creation. Okay, the world around you is declaring the existence of some sort of infinite being. Creation is demanding that there's some sort of creator. So in the first section of Psalm 19, David says, if you're looking for a God, then look to creation. And then he transitions into his second section of Psalm 19. He's gonna talk about something else that blows his mind with its beauty and its power. And if you're anything like me, it's like he's talked about the sky, he's talked about the sun, and so I'm assuming he's probably, what's he gonna talk about next? Probably like oceans or mountains or whales or lions, or maybe he's gonna talk about love or family or music or something like that. Instead, here's the other thing that David says blows his mind with its beauty and its power. He says, the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. David says, creation blows my mind because it's powerful and it's beautiful. And then he says next, the other thing that blows my mind is the law of the Lord. That's what the whole second section is gonna be about. God's law, like his commands that we find in the Bible, his blueprint for how to build a life that actually works. David thinks it's powerful and beautiful. Before we read through the second section together, I wanna point out David is no longer using the word El to talk about God. Now he's calling God Lord. And the Hebrew word there is Yahweh. And Yahweh was basically like God's first name. When you call God Yahweh, you're on a first name basis with the creator of the universe. And right now you're going like, dude, why are you nerding out about all this Hebrew? It's like, well, first of all, because I'm a nerd. So just back off just a little bit. But the main reason is because it's important. And here's why it's important. Remember the first section, David is saying, if you're looking for a God, look to creation. And now in the second section, David is saying, but if you're looking for the one true God, then look to his law. In the first section, he's going, if you're just looking for proof of an infinite being, then just look around the world. In the second section, he's going, on the other hand, if you want to be on a first name basis with that infinite being, then you need to look to God's perfect law. He started wide, and now he's like narrowing the thing down for us. He's like, he's helping us to look for the right things in the right place. If you're looking for a God, look to creation. And now he's like, if you're looking for a relationship with God, then look to his law. All right, second section of Psalm 19, here we go. He says, the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. And then he basically just repeats himself for the rest of the section. He goes, the statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple, and the precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart, and the commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes, and the respect of the Lord is pure, enduring forever, and the ordinances of the Lord are sure and altogether righteous, and they, God's law, it's more precious than gold, much pure gold, and it's sweeter than honey, even honey straight from the comb, and by them, by obeying your law, is your servant warned, and through them, there is great reward. Okay, the second section of Psalm 19 is the crux. It's the reason David is writing this thing in the first place. It's the point. And the theme that David is driving home in this section is the same theme you see in all of the Bible from cover to cover. It's the idea that our lives are best lived in obedience. Obedience to God. And right away, I get it. There's some of us, you've got church baggage. I'm one of you, by the way. But there's some of us, and you're starting to go, I don't know, man, this is starting to sound like my old church, right? Where it was all about rule following and perfectionism, and it just made me feel guilty all of the time. I get it. But also, this isn't your old church. I'm not your old pastor. Even if you don't like me, I don't work here. Come back next week. Be someone different. All right, so I get your worries, all right? I understand that. But some of us are going like, I don't know, this sounds like my old church. But honestly, your old church was probably trying to teach you something good and true. They were just doing a bad job of it. Because the truth, cover to cover through the whole Bible, is that our lives are best lived in obedience. And so let's hit pause on Psalm 19 for just a minute, and let me explain what I mean by obedience so that we're all on the same page here, okay? First of all, to be clear, we don't obey God so that we can earn our way into heaven. That's That's a tired, old idea, and it's just not true. Okay, that we can't earn that. That was earned for us through Jesus' death and resurrection. So when I say obedience, I'm not talking about perfectionism. I'm not talking about rule following for the sake of rule following. Obedience is not like some heaven or hell pass or fail exam, right? It was like, you cussed, so now you're going to hell. You better hurry up and take communion so you can go to heaven again. That's not how God works. He's gracious, he's forgiving. But if he's gracious and forgiving, then why would we have to obey in the first place? Well, you and I are called to obey God for 3 primary reasons. Here they are. First one, obedience brings God glory. It's like the primary reason. Like when we obey God, he's honored and glorified, just like any good father feels when his kids obey him. And the point of us existing is to glorify and honor God. So we obey because it brings God glory. The second reason we obey is because a relationship with God grows through obedience. And some of us are going, that sounds messed up. Like, what other relationship grows when you obey the person? Like, that sounds like God's on a power trip. It's not messed up, and it's totally natural. Think about marriage, for example. Like my relationship with my wife, Allie, is built on the vows that we made 15 years ago, and our relationship grows through obedience to those vows. Okay, I could tell her I love her all day long. If I'm cheating on her and breaking my vows, then our relationship won't grow, it'll just deteriorate. And it's the same idea in a relationship with God. A relationship with God grows through obedience. In fact, Jesus said it the most bluntly. Jesus said, "You're my friends if you do what I command." A relationship with God is built on Jesus' death and resurrection. A friendship with him grows through obedience. So we obey because it brings God glory. We obey because a relationship with God grows through obedience. And then the third reason we obey is because obedience makes our lives better. Like, the third reason to obey is basically self-serving. It makes your life better. This is how Jesus ends his Sermon on the Mount. He goes, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice and obeys them is like a wise man who built his life on a rock. Like, you'll be able to survive the storms that get thrown your way. And then in the very first 3 verses of that big old book of Psalms, it states the theme of the book of Psalms, and it says the same thing. Look at this. It says, "Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but instead his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he meditates day and night." If that's you, then you're like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither, and whatever you do will prosper. All throughout the Bible, all throughout the Psalms, and then in Psalm 19 specifically, the theme is the same. It's the idea that our lives are best lived in obedience. And so now unpause, go back to Psalm 19. Look at the words that David uses to describe God's law. Okay, I did the work for you, here they are. He says God's law is perfect, trustworthy, radiant, pure, eternal, righteous, precious, and sweet. I think if you're anything like me, most of the words that we would use to describe God's law most of the time is stuff like hard to carry out, right? Strict, unattainable, confusing. David didn't think that. He had the right perspective. Said that God's law is perfect, trustworthy, radiant, pure, eternal, righteous, precious, sweet. Well, is there anything in your life that you could describe with all of those words? It's like your best friend's advice is good. It's not that good, right? The self-help guru on Instagram might be helpful. I doubt it, but he's not that helpful, right? And then go look at the words that he uses to describe what happens to our lives when we obey. David says obedience revives us, and it makes us wise, gives us joy, gives us clarity, it warns us, and it's simply just rewarding. Like, again, if you're like me, the words we would typically use to describe like trying to obey what we learn in the Bible would be stuff like difficult, hard, exhausting, failure, what's the point, right? Joy kill. But David doesn't look at it that way. He knows that obedience is just rewarding and good for you. And so in the first section, David says, if you're looking for a God, then look to creation. In the second section, he goes, if you're looking to be on a first name basis in a relationship with this God, then look to the law. And then in the third section, super short, he just ends with a prayer for obedience. And he prays this. He goes, who can discern his errors? Like, who can even know when they're messing their own lives up? So God, forgive my hidden faults. Keep your servant, me, also from willful sins. May they not rule over me. If you do that, I'll be blameless and innocent of great transgression. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. And then that's it, the end of Psalm 19. Okay, that was a lot. That was genuinely a lot of information, a lot of verses, especially this early in the morning. And so let's just take a breath. Let's build a bridge between Psalm 19 and our personal lives. Like, what can we learn from this in 2024? And here it is. Here's the whole point of today, because it's the whole point of Psalm 19. The point is that David is saying, he's going, listen, the direction that you've been looking for, and the guidance and the wisdom and the breath of fresh air and the joy and like the meaning and purpose that you've been looking for, all of it can be found in God's law, in his truth, like in God's blueprint for how to build a life that lasts. The point of Psalm 19 is David is going, listen, you've been looking for the right things, but you're looking in all of the wrong places. And you don't need me to tell you that it's made a mess of your life, right? But you didn't wind up in the toxic relationship because you're stupid. You're not stupid, you're lonely. And you went looking for safety and comfort and love. You just looked in the wrong place. And when you look in the right place, when you look to God's law, you discover a God who loved you enough to make the ultimate sacrifice to be in a healthy relationship with you. And you're not an addict because you're weak, right? You were looking for control. You were looking for consistency, but you looked in the wrong place. And when you look to God's law, you discover a God who has the power to break the chains that are holding you down. When you follow God's law, you build some like consistency into your life in a healthy way. And then you didn't self-harm because you're self-destructive. That's circular reasoning. That sentence doesn't even make sense. You self-harmed because you were looking for relief from the pain inside, but you looked in the wrong place. And if you look to God and if you look through obedience, you discover a God, you discover a Jesus who had such internal suffering. He said that I'm weeping to the point of death in a garden one time. And you discover a God who says, when you're hurting so bad that you can't even pray, I'll just groan inside of your spirit and pray for you. Like, we were designed to desire the good things of God. It's just that we're sinful, which means we get all turned around, we get all backwards, and we get all confused, and we go off looking for the good things of God in all the wrong places. And so in Psalm 19, David is like begging you to pay attention, and he's promising you that obedience is where you can find all the right things that you've been looking for. But whenever we sin, whenever we go off looking in the wrong places, we're just like me when I'm trying to find that cave back in Tennessee, right? Remember, like what I wanted was a fine thing. I wanted to explore a cave. And I had the guide for how to get there in my hands. I just didn't read it or follow its instructions, and it put me in a pickle. And real life works the same way. We want the right things. You just want to be loved, or desired, or happy, or wise, or comforted, or safe, you name it. We want all the right things, and we have the guide for how to get them in our hands. It's that big fat book called the Bible. It's just a lot of times we just don't read it or follow its instructions. And so now we're in a pickle. How do you get out of the pickle? How do you get out of the mess that you're in? Through obedience. This is why we get together week after week at churches all over the world. This isn't just something to do on a Sunday morning. right? So that you can pat yourself on the back and check it off the list and be like, I'm a good Christian soldier. I attended 10 weeks in a row. That's not what this is about. We get together so that we can worship God and then look at his law and try to better understand it, because we believe that it will lead us to a more abundant life. We believe that obedience is where we can find all the right things that we've been looking for. And so I'm about to pray, but before I do, just what are some practical steps, right? What are some practical things that you and I can do to start choosing obedience? I got 2 ideas for you. They're both pretty simple. The first one is this: just keep coming to Hope City week after week after week. Like, make it a priority in your life. And what I mean, though, is like, don't just show up to show up. Instead, like, don't just sit and listen to the sermon and nod and then jump into your car and live life like you always live life. Instead, like, commit to applying what you're learning from God's word. Like, when Cody ends a sermon with practical next steps, like I'm doing right now, that's not because Cody and I learned like every sermon ends with an application. Like, we're not following some outline. We're doing this because we truly believe that obedience is where we're gonna find all the things that we've been looking for. And so show up every single weekend. Jump completely into this community of people who are trying to live the good life that Jesus talked about, and actually take the next steps that get talked about in here every single weekend. That's the first idea. The second idea for you is this: wake up every single morning and pray the same prayer of obedience that David prayed in Psalm 19. Remember, it went like this. He said, who can discern his errors? Like, this could just be your prayer every single morning. Who can discern his errors? How am I supposed to know when I'm off the tracks? So God, please forgive my hidden faults. Forgive the stuff that I'm doing wrong and I don't even know it. Keep your servant also from willful sins. Keep me from the things that are wrong and I know it and I keep doing it. May those things not rule over me. If you do that, I'll be blameless and innocent of great transgression. And may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Just try it for like 7 days in a row. You wake up in the morning, you flip to Psalm 19, and you pray the same prayer of obedience that David himself prayed, just as a way of trying to remember that you need help. We need help looking for the right things in the right place for once. And pray that prayer every morning as a way of kind of training your heart, soul, and mind and strength, like training your spirit to point in the right direction every morning, the direction that leads toward obedience. Because I promise obedience is going to be the right place to find all the stuff that you've been looking for. All right, let's pray. God, I thank you for just this moment, and I thank you for these people and this time together. And God, this place just has a lot to celebrate right now, so I thank you for all of that. I thank you for Light of the City and all the people who showed up here. God, I pray that, like, for the people who just showed up for the fireworks and they bounced, God, like weeks from now, months from now, years from now, when their life starts to fall apart and they start to wonder if maybe you have anything for them, like, we would be very honored if they came to try to learn about you with us. So would Hope City kind of just stick in their minds and their hearts. And thank you for all these students that went to camp. I know that can absolutely change a person's life, so we thank you for that. We got a lot to be thankful for. At the same time, like, every single one of us has made a mess of at least one part of our lives. If you're anything like me, we've made a mess of just basically the whole thing. And the good news, the gospel, is that you've forgiven us for that. And we're met with grace, and you're not holding a grudge against us. And part of that good news is that at the same time, you just want something better for us, and you outlined how we can get there. You gave us your law. You gave us your commands, and you said if you live this way, then you'll start making less messes for yourself. So God, please make us discerning. Help us to understand where we've gone off the rails. God, forgive us our hidden faults, the things that we don't even know we're screwing up. God, please keep us from willful sins, the things that we're screwing up and we know it. God, please forgive us for all of those things and lead us into the freedom of your perfect law. God, I love you very much, and I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, so we're gonna have a moment right now where you can just pray. You can take communion. if you'd like, this can be passed around here in a second, but you can also just take a moment to pray, to reflect, to ask God what he wants to teach you today. We've also opened the doors over here where if you want to pray with someone, you want someone to pray over you, you want to talk through what you're going through with someone else, you can head right out these doors and meet with one of our prayer team. But love you. Have a quick moment of prayer and silence.